A sweet treat turned deadly. Who poisoned perfection? Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Umbra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing our community connect from every corner. Your comments make this journey richer. Let's begin. If you want to test the measure of a man, interrupt his schedule. If he squawks, he's common. If he adapts, he's adaptable. And if he looks at you as if you're a stray crumb on a silk lapel, you've met Mr. Nero Wolfe. At 3 minutes to 4 that Thursday afternoon, with the orchids safely beyond my reach during Wolfe's daily 3-hour communion upstairs, the doorbell sounded with the particular insistence that suggests either urgent business or misguided optimism. I was at my desk in the office, wrestling with invoices from purveyors whose bills contained more flowery adjectives than actual totals, when Fritz's voice drifted down the hall with that extra syllable that meant trouble. "Archie, please come." His tone had more vowels than a Puccini aria, which in Fritz's case usually meant someone was threatening the natural order of his kitchen universe. I abandoned the bills and got the door. Standing on our stoop was a delivery boy whose cap had seen better decades and whose grip on an insulated parcel suggested he was transporting either precious cargo or a small explosive device. The box bore an elegant label reading Lexington Patisserie, in script that didn't come from any neighborhood print shop, and in the sender space, someone had written "From a friend of sweetness" in type that looked hand-pressed. "Delivery from Mr. Nero Wolfe," the boy announced, angling a clipboard toward me with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that signatures meant tips. "West 35th Street, I confirmed, taking the clipboard. "Who paid for this?" "Lady already settled up. Said the tip was between you and your conscience." I gave him enough to keep his faith in human nature intact, closed the door, and carried the parcel toward the kitchen. Fritz intercepted me like a defensive lineman protecting his end zone, hands extended with the reverence usually reserved for sacraments and soufflés. "Please, Archie, do not jostle. Is it cold?" "Arctic." I handed it over, watching as he carried it to the marble preparation table with the care of a curator handling a Stradivarius. The packaging was silk ribbon tied in a lover's knot, the kind of detail that suggested either genuine affection or calculated manipulation. Fritz loosened the ribbon and lifted the lid, revealing a cake that could have made angels weep with envy. It was the size of a small hat box, a perfect dome dusted with fine sugar and cocoa, surrounded by piped rosettes that demonstrated the kind of artistry that separates craft from art. The aroma that rose from it was intoxicating, dark chocolate, toasted hazelnuts, and underneath it all, something floral and faintly dangerous. Tucked beneath the decorative ribbon was a card, cream-colored vellum with a single line in the same elegant script. "Eat at your own risk." Fritz muttered something in German that didn't translate to "how thoughtful," and I plucked the card with 2 fingers as if it might bite. Who would send such a thing? Fritz's voice had folded into the suspicious territory he reserved for ingredients of questionable provenance. His eyes, which could appear innocent when selecting parsley, were now sharp as paring knives. "Someone with either a twisted sense of humor or a genuine warning to deliver," I replied, studying the card under the kitchen light. "The question is whether Mr. Wolfe is supposed to admire it, analyze it, or avoid it entirely." Fritz frowned at the cake, then covered it with clean muslin like a shroud. "We do not taste it," he declared with finality. "Gold star for common sense." I carried the card to the office and placed it under the desk lamp, searching for fingerprints, watermarks, or any clue about our mysterious benefactor. The paper was expensive, the ink was professional, and the message was either a joke or a genuine threat. In our line of work, the distinction was often academic. At 5:30, the house phone buzzed. Fritz's voice carried the particular tension that meant our quiet afternoon was officially over. "Archie, there is a telephone call for Mr. Wolfe. A Miss Serena Vale. She says it concerns the package that was delivered." Serena Vale. The name belonged to a woman whose photograph appeared regularly in the society pages, usually standing beside elaborate dessert displays at charity functions. She organized galas the way generals planned campaigns, with precision, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Tell her Mr. Wolfe will be available at 6, I said. "I'll take the preliminary details." The voice that came through the receiver was crisp and controlled, with just enough warmth to be dangerous. "Mr. Goodwin, I apologize for the intrusion, but I believe Mr. Wolfe will want to hear about this matter personally." "I'm listening." "Someone is sabotaging my charity gala, and they've escalated to direct threats. The Sweet and Right Gala is this Saturday. We raise funds for pediatric research through a dessert competition. 3 incidents have already occurred. Salt substituted for sugar at a tasting, gelatin that refused to set in a suspicious manner, and threatening notes left in pastry boxes. The cake I sent to Mr. Wolfe is identical to 2 that arrived at my office, both containing ingredients that could be problematic." "Problematic how?" "The first contained traces of tonka bean, coumarin, technically illegal as a food additive, though not immediately dangerous. The second was harmless but carried the same message. I sent one to Mr. Wolfe because I was told he would recognize the significance and might be interested in preventing further escalation." I glanced toward the kitchen where Fritz had undoubtedly identified the offending spice by scent alone. "Who told you that?" "Someone who claimed to know his methods. I need this stopped before Saturday, Mr. Goodwin. Quietly and completely." 6 o'clock. I said. "Be on time and be prepared to explain why someone would want to sabotage pediatric research through pastry." At 6:15, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms like a force of nature in custom-tailored clothing. He settled behind his desk, glanced at the card I'd placed there, and lifted an eyebrow a fraction of an inch. His equivalent of a standing ovation for anything that managed to surprise him. "Explain," he said. I gave him the facts without editorial comment. Delivery, card, phone call, client. I mentioned the tonka bean identification, courtesy of Fritz's educated nose. Wolfe listened without interruption, then rose and walked to the kitchen. I followed, watching as he lifted the muslin and inhaled deeply. His expression darkened by several shades. "Dispose of it," he ordered Fritz. "Sealed container, and remove it from the premises immediately." Fritz, who had clearly been hoping for exactly this instruction, already had a disposal bag ready. He gathered the cake with the efficiency of a bomb disposal expert and departed for parts unknown, moving with the rigid dignity of a soldier on a sacred mission. Back in the office, Wolfe lowered himself into his chair and reached for the beer opener. "Miss Vale," he said without preamble. "Arriving momentarily." At 6:30 sharp, our doorbell announced the arrival of a woman who entered our office like she owned it. Serena Vale was elegant in the way that money and breeding can achieve when combined with natural intelligence and iron determination. She wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored by someone who understood that clothes should enhance rather than announce, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting results. She took the red leather chair facing Wolfe's desk and got straight to business. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. I assume Mr. Goodwin has explained the situation." Wolfe inclined his head a precise quarter inch. "Your summary was adequate. State what you want." "I want the sabotage stopped before Saturday. I want the person responsible identified and prevented from causing harm. And I want to preserve the reputation of an event that funds 12 pediatric research grants annually." She paused. "I'll pay your standard fee plus expenses." "You haven't asked the amount." "I didn't come here to negotiate over my own reputation, Mr. Wolfe. If you solve this quietly, it's worth whatever you charge. If you don't, I'll need the money for damage control." I had to admire her style. Not many people could sit across from Wolfe and maintain that level of composure while essentially writing a blank check. "Tell us about the incidents," I said. "All of them in detail." She did, efficiently and without embellishment. The first, suspicious cake had arrived at her office 2 days earlier, elegant and perfect except for the subtle addition of ground tonka bean, detected only when her assistant, who had a particularly sensitive palate, noticed the unusual aroma. The second cake was harmless, but carried the same threatening message. At a private tasting for major donors, gelatin had failed to set in a manner that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than kitchen error. And that morning, a sugar bowl at her office had been replaced with salt, the kind of juvenile prank that suggested escalation rather than sophistication. The final note was more direct, she continued. Cancel the gala, or someone will be hurt. Not killed, Mr. Wolfe. Hurt. Which suggests they're planning something that would cause harm without necessarily being fatal. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, his version of deep contemplation. You have guests with food allergies? Several. We maintain detailed dietary restriction lists for exactly that reason. Someone with access to those lists could cause considerable harm with the right or wrong ingredients. And you sent a potentially dangerous cake to my address because? Because I was told you would recognize the significance and might be motivated to help. I needed to demonstrate that this wasn't simply about money or reputation. It was about the deliberate corruption of food itself. Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond our visitor's shoulder. Finally, he spoke. You will provide complete lists of all personnel with access to your kitchens, offices, and storage areas. You will also provide the roster of competing chefs, the dietary restriction lists for all guests, and copies of any threatening communications. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you tomorrow morning to examine the venues and interview relevant parties. You'll take the case? I will prevent the sabotage of your gala, Wolfe said with the quiet certainty of someone stating a natural law. My fee is $5,000 as a retainer, with expenses and an equal amount upon successful resolution. She wrote the check without hesitation, placing it on his desk with the satisfaction of someone who had just purchased insurance against disaster. There's one more thing, she said as she prepared to leave. The competition kitchen is at the Astoria Carlton. If I cancel the event, the saboteur wins. If I don't, and something happens to a guest, nothing will happen, Wolfe interrupted, not as reassurance, but as a statement of fact. You will not cancel. After she left, I leaned against the door frame and studied Wolfe, who was contemplating his beer with unusual intensity. So, I said, care to explain why you took this one? The disruption of your afternoon routine, the insult to Fritz's kitchen, the philosophical offense of corrupting dessert for malicious purposes? No, he said simply. Fair enough. Tomorrow I go play detective among the pastry chefs and philanthropists. Should I call Saul Penza for backup? Not yet. First, you will call Miss Vale's office and secure the documents I requested. Then you will contact the food critic Parker. He mentioned my name to Miss Vale, and I want to know why. Finally, you will inform Fritz that he is not to discuss his culinary methods with anyone, and that any inquiries about his work should be directed to me immediately. Anything else? Yes. Tomorrow, when you visit the competition kitchen, pay particular attention to the storage and preparation areas. Someone with access to both the gala planning and the dietary restrictions has been very careful to create maximum disruption with minimum legal exposure. That suggests either professional knowledge or amateur cunning guided by professional advice. I made the necessary calls, extracted the required information from Parker, who had recommended Wolfe to Vale because he thought it would make an interesting column, and briefed Fritz on the new security protocols. By 8 o'clock, we had settled into our evening routine, but the atmosphere in the brownstone had subtly changed. We had a case. Not a murder yet. With Wolfe, it rarely started with a body. It started with a disruption of order, a violation of trust, or in this case, the deliberate corruption of something that should bring pleasure and nourishment. The mysterious cake was gone, but its message lingered like an unwelcome aftertaste. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the day's events. Someone was playing games with dessert, threatening charity, and challenging the natural order of things that Nero Wolfe held sacred. They had made their opening move by violating the sanctity of our kitchen. Tomorrow, we would begin our response. And in my experience, when someone foolish enough to threaten Wolfe's world through food, they usually discovered that his appetite for justice was every bit as refined as his taste in cuisine. The brownstone settled into its nighttime quiet, but I had the distinct feeling that our peaceful routine was about to become significantly more complicated. Someone had declared war on dessert itself, and they had just made the tactical error of bringing that war to our door. Friday morning, I would begin hunting for a saboteur who thought they could hide behind frosting and fondant. It was going to be an interesting week. Friday morning arrived with Fritz humming Puccini in the kitchen, a sure sign that the natural order of things remained intact within our four walls, even if chaos was brewing elsewhere. I found Wolfe at his customary breakfast post, methodically working through his morning routine with the precision of a Swiss chronometer. The stack of documents Miss Vale had promised sat on my desk like a small paper mountain, delivered at dawn by a messenger who'd clearly been instructed that speed mattered more than sleep. "The competition kitchen opens at 9, I announced, settling into my chair with coffee that could have awakened the dead. Miss Vale expects me there by 9:30. I've got personnel files, dietary restriction lists, kitchen access logs, and copies of all the threatening notes." Wolfe grunted acknowledgement while applying butter to his toast with the care of an artist preparing a canvas. "The notes," he said without looking up. "Describe the progression." I consulted my notebook, though the details were burned into my memory. 3 escalating messages. First, eat at your own risk with the Tonka bean cake. Second, sweet dreams can become nightmares tucked under the salt bowl. Third, cancel the gala, or someone will be hurt. Delivered yesterday with clean petit fours. Same elegant handwriting, same expensive vellum, same anonymous signature. "Escalation without commitment," Wolfe observed, dabbing his lips. "Warning to threat to ultimatum, yet the actual sabotage remains relatively harmless. Salt for sugar, enzyme-corrupted gelatin, illegal but non-lethal spices. Someone seeks leverage through fear rather than genuine harm. Unless they're building toward Saturday night's grand finale." Precisely. The dietary restrictions. How comprehensive. The allergy binder had kept me awake longer than I'd cared to admit. Meticulous. Nut allergies, shellfish sensitivities, diabetes, lactose intolerance, complete with emergency contact information and photographs. Someone with access to this information could hospitalize half the guest list without breaking a sweat. Wolfe's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering over the Hudson. Too many variables, too much access. When you examine the kitchen, pay particular attention to storage security, recent staff changes, and anyone whose behavior has shifted. Someone is orchestrating these incidents with inside knowledge. The Astoria Carlton's limestone facade suggested the kind of old money elegance that made nervous millionaires feel secure about their social standing. Miss Vale met me in the marble lobby, dressed in navy wool that meant business. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd spent the night wrestling with more than just event logistics. "Another note arrived at my apartment this morning," she said without preamble, handing me an envelope identical to the others. The message was brief and direct. "Last chance. Cancel or face the consequences." Hand-delivered? Slipped under my door between midnight and 6 a.m. Building security saw nothing, but we have multiple entrances. She paused, studying my expression. 3 board members are pushing to cancel. The insurance company is asking uncomfortable questions. If anything happens tomorrow night, "Nothing will happen," I said with more confidence than the circumstances warranted. "Let's see what the kitchen tells us." The competition area occupied the hotel's mezzanine level, a gleaming temple of stainless steel and professional-grade equipment that could have served as the backdrop for a culinary documentary about perfection. Owen Driscoll, the banquet director, met us at the service entrance. He was a man in his 40s with military posture and eyes that had seen too many wedding planners dissolve into tears. "I've secured event level B," he announced, producing a clipboard thick with documentation. "All entries logged since 6 a.m., and I've added extra security protocols." The kitchen itself was a symphony of controlled efficiency. 5 identical competition stations awaited tomorrow's gladiators, each equipped with professional ovens, mixers, and refrigeration units. But it was the details that caught my attention, the kind of small inconsistencies that whisper secrets to anyone willing to listen. "The storage areas," I said, examining a padlocked cage that held dry goods. "When was this lock replaced?" Driscoll colored slightly. "Last night. The old one was sticking. Maintenance cut it." I ran my finger along the lock's surface. No dust in the knurling. No scratches radiating from the shackle. New metal has a particular sheen that time hasn't dulled. "Who had the bolt cutters?" "Maintenance logs will show," he said, which wasn't the same as answering. Inside the cage, 2 50-pound bags of sugar sat like innocent twins. One had a taped seam that was too neat, too deliberate. I pinched a few grains between my fingers and touched them to my tongue. Salt confesses immediately when you ask the right questions. This batch confessed enthusiastically. "No one's touched these since delivery," Driscoll insisted. "We accept sealed merchandise." "Except for the return from Granular Foods yesterday," I observed, examining his clipboard. "The entries initialed AB, Alton Bryce." Miss Vale's expression sharpened. Alton was terminated 3 weeks ago. He tried to slip an undocumented relative onto the staff. Driscoll's jaw worked like he was chewing leather. "Then someone's using his initials, or your termination wasn't properly communicated to our temp pool." "If I have to micromanage your security too," Miss Vale said with silk-wrapped steel, "I'll move this event to a bowling alley." The head pastry chef, Elena Marchetti, was a compact woman whose hands moved with surgical precision and whose eyes missed nothing in her domain. She'd supervised 4 previous charity events for Miss Vale and regarded the recent sabotage as a personal insult to professional standards. "Whoever did this knows kitchens," she said, leading us through the preparation area. The salt substitution was clean, no residue, no obvious tampering. The gelatin failure was sophisticated. They added an enzyme that prevented proper setting without changing appearance or smell. This isn't amateur hour. "Who has storage access?" "All kitchen staff, competing chefs, their assistants, hotel security, maintenance, and night cleaning. Storage areas aren't locked during operational hours. Too much traffic for that kind of security." I examined the competition. Stations where tomorrow's battle would unfold. The kind of space where a skilled saboteur could work undetected if they understood routines and timing. "The competing chefs, tell me about them." Elena's professional neutrality cracked just enough to reveal personal opinions. 4 are legitimate talents. Marcus Beaumont has skills, but he's struggling. Financial problems, professional setbacks. He's desperate to win, and desperation makes people unpredictable. Unpredictable enough for sabotage? I didn't say that. But her tone suggested she hadn't ruled it out either. The event coordinator, Timothy Walsh, was a nervous young man who looked like he hadn't slept since the Coolidge administration. He provided a litany of small mysteries, missing ingredients, damaged chocolate deliveries, and yesterday's security footage showing an unidentified figure in chef's whites prowling the storage area after hours. "The cameras cover entrances and exits," he explained apologetically, "but not the storage area itself. Budget constraints." By noon, I'd interviewed 12 staff members and accumulated a collection of inconsistencies that suggested systematic interference rather than random mischief. Someone was playing a careful game, creating disruption while avoiding detection. I called the brownstone from the hotel lobby, catching Wolfe between his morning beer and lunch preparations. "Professional sabotage," I reported. Someone with kitchen experience, facility access, and detailed knowledge of Miss Vale's operation. The competing chefs are obvious suspects, but kitchen staff and support personnel can't be eliminated. Return immediately. We have developments here that require discussion. Anything I should know? The documents you collected this morning have been disturbed during your absence. Someone has taken considerable interest in our investigation. I caught a cab back to the brownstone, wondering what kind of amateur would be bold enough to breach Wolfe's sanctuary. In my experience, anyone foolish enough to violate our home base usually discovered that Wolfe's appetite for justice was every bit as refined as his taste in cuisine. The afternoon was about to become significantly more complicated, and I had the distinct feeling that our mysterious saboteur had just made their first serious tactical error. The brownstone felt different when I walked through the front door. Not violated exactly, but subtly disturbed, like finding your favorite chair moved 3 inches from where you left it. Fritz appeared from the kitchen with the rigid posture he reserved for genuine emergencies and visits from food critics, his usually serene expression creased with the kind of worry that meant someone had committed an offense against the natural order of things. "Archie, thank God you have returned," he said, wringing his hands like a man watching his soufflé collapse in slow motion. "Someone has been in the office while Mr. Wolfe was with the orchids. Nothing is missing, but the papers. They have been examined." I found Wolfe behind his desk, motionless as a Buddha carved from expensive flesh, holding a thin sheet of onion skin paper between thumb and forefinger, as if he'd plucked it from a compost heap. The morning's documents from Miss Vale sat in their neat stack exactly where I'd left them, but something in Wolfe's expression suggested that appearances were deceiving. "Observe," he said, gesturing toward my desk with the precision of a surgeon indicating a tumor. The stack looked identical to how I'd arranged it. The dietary restriction binder on top, personnel files beneath, kitchen access logs forming the foundation. But Wolfe's eye for detail was legendary, and I'd learned to trust his observations even when they seemed impossible. I leaned closer, examining the papers with the attention usually reserved for evidence in murder cases. There, the top sheet had a faint dog ear on its upper right corner, so perfectly pressed it looked almost artistic. The paperweight, shaped like a miniature golden bull, had been moved exactly half an inch forward from its original position. The entire stack had been rotated about 5 degrees counterclockwise from its precise alignment with my blotter's edge. "Someone's been playing a very delicate game of I Spy with our files," I muttered, straightening the stack with professional efficiency. "But how? Fritz was in the kitchen, you were upstairs, and every door was locked." "The window," Wolfe replied, rising with the deliberate movements of someone whose patience had been tested beyond acceptable limits. "Examine the latch." I crossed to the office window and found what he'd already discovered. A fresh scratch in the brass, fine as a hair but unmistakably new, and a tiny nick in the paint where metal had scraped wood. On the sill, caught in the groove where frame met glass, a smear the size of a pinhead glistened with the telltale sparkle of powdered sugar mixed with something floral. "Edible glitter," I observed, lifting the residue on my penknife blade. "The kind that goes on cupcakes for people who think dessert should double as a disco ball." Fritz appeared in the doorway, his distress evident in every line of his compact frame. "Please, I must tell you about the kitchen. My vanilla jar, the Tahitian beans. Someone moved it and took 1 bean. Also, the small bowl I use for citrus zest had powdered sugar residue, though I had used no sugar this morning." Wolfe's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering over the Hudson. Our intruder hadn't simply photographed documents. They'd conducted a reconnaissance mission through our entire domestic sanctuary, leaving traces that spoke of culinary expertise and intimate familiarity with professional kitchen practices. "The timing troubles me," I said, studying the evidence. "This happened while I was at the hotel questioning staff. Either remarkable coincidence or careful coordination." "Coordination," Wolfe stated with finality. Someone wanted access to our files while ensuring you were occupied elsewhere. They photographed rather than stole, efficient and professional. The question is whether they sought specific information or merely wanted to gauge the scope of our investigation. I examined the dietary restriction binder more carefully and found additional signs of examination. Pages turned and returned, but with 2 tabs reversed in order. On one page, a faint, greasy crescent near the edge suggested fingers that had been handling fats or oils. Professional kitchen work left distinctive traces on hands, and our intruder had been careless enough to transfer them to paper. This narrows our suspect pool considerably, I observed. Someone with kitchen experience, knowledge of our routines, and access to professional-grade equipment for window manipulation. Plus, they're connected to someone who uses edible glitter in their work. The telephone rang with a particular insistence that suggested urgent developments. I answered to find Elena Marchetti's voice, tight with controlled panic. "Mr. Goodwin, please forgive the intrusion, but we have a serious situation at the hotel. Someone contaminated preparation areas during the lunch shift. 3 staff members are violently ill. The doctor suspects deliberate poisoning. Can you return immediately?" I covered the mouthpiece and relayed the information to Wolfe, whose jaw tightened with the kind of controlled anger that usually preceded expensive consequences for whoever had earned his displeasure. "We'll be there within the hour," I told Elena. "Secure the affected areas and ensure the staff receives proper medical attention. This may not be simple food poisoning." After hanging up, I turned to find Wolfe already reaching for his overcoat, a rare departure from routine that indicated he considered the situation genuinely serious. "The escalation follows a logical pattern," he said, struggling into the garment with Fritz's assistance. "Reconnaissance this morning, direct assault this afternoon. Someone is operating on a compressed timeline, probably driven by tomorrow night's event deadline. Or driven by panic because we're getting too close to identifying them. Both possibilities lead to the same conclusion. We're dealing with someone who has moved beyond mere sabotage to deliberate harm. Call Saul Panzer immediately. Have him meet us at the hotel with surveillance equipment. Also contact Inspector Kramer and inform him we may require police assistance for a matter involving deliberate food contamination." I made the calls while Wolfe prepared for his excursion, reflecting on how quickly our case had evolved from mysterious cakes to breaking and entering to actual poisoning. Someone was playing for much higher stakes than charity gala disruption, and they'd just demonstrated their willingness to harm innocent people to achieve their objectives. The taxi ride to the Astoria Carlton gave me time to process the morning's revelations. Our mysterious saboteur had graduated from external threats to direct invasion of our sanctuary, then immediately escalated to causing actual physical harm. The progression suggested either desperation or a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to overwhelm our investigation through rapid escalation. "Any theories about our uninvited visitor?" I asked as we navigated midtown traffic. "Several. The edible glitter and vanilla bean theft suggest someone with access to professional pastry supplies and knowledge of high-end ingredients, combined with the sophisticated window entry and document photography. We're looking for someone with both culinary expertise and criminal capability." "Amity Cole fits that profile," I said, remembering the details from Miss Vale's files. Former pastry assistant, current gatekeeper for the dietary restrictions, and she left Elena's employ after a quarrel about artistic standards versus efficiency. An interesting convergence of access, motive, and opportunity, Wolfe agreed. Someone with intimate knowledge of both the event planning and the participants' vulnerabilities, plus a personal grievance that could motivate sabotage. Miss Vale met us in the Astoria Carlton's lobby. Her usual composure cracked just enough to reveal the strain of managing a crisis that threatened months of careful planning. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd spent the night wrestling with more than just logistics. 3 staff members, she reported as we rode the elevator to the mezzanine level. All experienced kitchen personnel, all violently ill within minutes of tasting contaminated ingredients. The doctor suspects deliberate poisoning, but the substance hasn't been identified yet. And tomorrow's competition? Postponement means cancellation. We can't reschedule this level of coordination. But if I proceed and something happens to a guest... She left the sentence unfinished, but the implications hung in the air like smoke from a ruined soufflé. The elevator doors opened onto controlled chaos, and I realized that our mysterious saboteur had just raised the stakes to a level that would test all of Wolfe's considerable talents. Someone had moved from psychological warfare to direct assault, and they'd chosen to do it on the eve of an event that could expose hundreds of people to similar attacks. The game had changed, the stakes had become dangerous, and somewhere in the maze of professional kitchens and charity politics, a saboteur with both culinary skills and criminal intent was preparing for what might be their final, most devastating move. The afternoon was about to become significantly more complicated, and I had the distinct feeling that our careful investigation was about to become a race against time. The mezzanine level had been transformed into what Fritz would have called a kitchen in mourning. All the professional efficiency remained, but the soul had been poisoned out of it. Elena Marchetti stood beside the central preparation island like a general, surveying a battlefield where the casualties were invisible but real. The air carried that particular tension that comes when people who work with their hands suddenly can't trust their tools. 3 staff members, all hospitalized within 20 minutes of each other, Elena reported as we approached the cordoned area. They were testing components for tomorrow's competition: crème anglaise, chocolate ganache, fruit coulis, all recipes that required vanilla extract from the same bottle. Wolfe examined the evidence with the methodical attention he usually reserved for orchid catalogues. The vanilla bottle sat under police tape, its label pristine, its contents now suspect. He lifted it carefully, removed the cap, and inhaled with the deep concentration of a man reading a book written in aromas. "Syrup of ipecac," he announced with the certainty of someone stating the weather, mixed with Madagascar vanilla to mask the medicinal scent. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge, ipecac was once standard in first aid kits for poison emergencies, though less common now. "Where do you keep your medical supplies, Miss Marchetti?" "Locked office down the hall," she replied, her professional composure strained but intact. "Standard hotel policy." I made the obvious detour and found exactly what Wolfe's educated nose had suggested: an empty space in the first aid kit where a brown bottle of ipecac syrup had once resided, its outline preserved in dust like a crime scene silhouette. The lock on the office door showed fresh scratches, the kind that come from someone who knows locks but lacks the proper key. When I returned, Inspector Kramer had arrived with his usual collection of grim expressions and skeptical questions. He spotted Wolfe, and his face arranged itself into the particular scowl he reserved for cases that threatened to become complicated. "Wolfe," he grunted, approaching with the heavy tread of a man whose day had just gotten significantly worse. "What are you doing here? Don't tell me you've taken up catering as a hobby." "Inspector," Wolfe replied with the smooth courtesy that always made Kramer more suspicious, "a crime has been committed that involves both culinary expertise and systematic escalation. My presence, while perhaps inconvenient for your procedures, serves the cause of justice." "Justice? 3 people got poisoned, Wolfe. This isn't some fancy dinner party mystery. This is assault with intent to cause bodily harm." "Indeed, which suggests our perpetrator has moved beyond mere sabotage to direct action. The progression is instructive: threats, minor disruptions, property invasion, and now deliberate poisoning. Someone is working toward a specific objective with tomorrow's gala as either target or deadline." While Wolfe and Kramer engaged in their traditional verbal fencing match, I sought out the details that would either confirm or eliminate our growing suspicions. The contaminated vanilla had been stored in the common ingredient area, accessible to anyone with kitchen privileges, but the timing of the substitution required inside knowledge of preparation schedules and staff routines. The bottle was replaced sometime between yesterday evening and this morning's prep work, Elena explained, consulting her clipboard with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing controlled chaos. The affected staff were all working on competition components that required vanilla extract in precise measurements. Timothy Walsh, the nervous event coordinator, appeared at my elbow with the expression of a man watching his career dissolve in real time. "Mr. Goodwin, I have the security footage you requested. The hallway camera shows 5 people accessing the office area since yesterday evening. Elena twice, Owen Driscoll once, a maintenance worker, and a woman in chef's whites whose face was partially obscured by a surgical mask." The footage revealed what I'd begun to suspect: a figure moving with the confident efficiency of someone familiar with professional kitchen protocols, carrying herself with a particular posture that comes from years of precise work under pressure. The height, the shoulders, the way she handled the office door, all consistent with Amity Cole's profile. "I need to examine the dietary restriction binder," I told Miss Vale, who had been maintaining her composure through what appeared to be sheer force of will. She produced the leather-bound folder that contained the medical information for tomorrow's guests, a comprehensive catalogue of allergies, sensitivities, and dietary requirements that could serve as either protection or weapon, depending on the user's intentions. I compared the current version with my photographs from yesterday and found the subtle alterations that confirmed our worst suspicions. "Someone's been editing the medical restrictions," I announced, showing Wolfe the evidence. 3 severe nut allergies reclassified as mild sensitivities. 2 diabetic guests listed as having no dietary restrictions, if tomorrow's chefs rely on this modified information. "Mass hospitalization without criminal intent," Wolfe concluded. "The perfect crime? Harm caused by following official instructions that have been deliberately corrupted. Someone with access to both the original medical information and the kitchen preparation areas has created the conditions for systematic poisoning disguised as human error." Saul Panzer materialized beside the service elevator with his characteristic ability to appear exactly when needed. His weathered face showed no surprise at finding Wolfe outside the brownstone. Unusual circumstances had long ago taught him to expect flexible approaches to detection. "Perimeter surveillance confirmed," he reported quietly. "Subject matching Amity Cole's description observed entering through service entrance at 6:30 this morning, approximately 1 hour before the vanilla incident. She carried a small leather case consistent with professional tools and remained in the building for 47 minutes. The evidence was accumulating with the methodical precision of a well-prepared source, each element adding depth to the overall picture. But Wolfe's expression suggested he was processing implications that extended beyond simple identification of the perpetrator. "The pattern reveals sophisticated planning combined with increasing desperation," he observed, studying the contaminated vanilla bottle with the attention usually reserved for rare manuscripts. "Our saboteur possesses culinary expertise, medical knowledge, and detailed familiarity with both the charity's operations and professional kitchen protocols. The escalation from external threats to property invasion to deliberate poisoning suggests either a compressed timeline or mounting pressure to achieve their objective." "Or both," I suggested. "Someone who's running out of time and options." "Precisely. Which makes tomorrow's gala either the culmination of their campaign or their final opportunity to succeed. We must assume they will attempt something significantly more dramatic than vanilla substitution." Elena's professional composure finally showed signs of strain. "If I can't guarantee the safety of my staff or the competition participants, I'll have to recommend cancellation. The liability exposure alone could destroy the hotel's reputation." "No cancellation," Miss Vale interrupted with steel in her voice that could have cut through the hotel's marble facade. 12 pediatric research grants depend on tomorrow's success. We proceed, but with enhanced security and modified protocols." I admired her determination while calculating the risks of proceeding with an event that had become the target of systematic sabotage. Someone with dangerous skills was orchestrating a campaign designed to create maximum disruption with minimal legal exposure, and they'd just demonstrated their willingness to cause actual physical harm. "We need to locate Miss Cole immediately," I said. "If she's our saboteur, she knows we're closing in. Desperate people with culinary expertise and access to professional kitchens can cause considerable damage in a short time." Kramer, who had been listening with the expression of a man watching his simple assault case transform into something requiring actual detective work, stepped forward with his notebook ready. "I'll have units canvass the building. She's still here. We'll find her." "Inspector," Wolfe said with the quiet authority that made even skeptical police officers pay attention, "when you locate Miss Cole, observe her hands carefully. Someone who has been working with powdered sugar, edible glitter, and pharmaceutical preparations will carry traces that standard washing cannot entirely remove. Also, examine any personal tools or equipment she may be carrying. The precision of these sabotage efforts suggests professional-grade implements." As the investigation shifted into higher gear around us, I reflected on how quickly our case had evolved from mysterious cakes to breaking and entering to deliberate poisoning. Someone had declared war on the natural order of things that Wolfe held sacred, and they'd made the tactical error of bringing that war to our doorstep. The afternoon sun slanted through the hotel's tall windows, casting long shadows across the gleaming kitchen equipment. Somewhere in this maze of professional efficiency and charity politics, a saboteur with dangerous skills was preparing for what might be their most devastating move yet. Tomorrow's gala was shaping up to be either the climax of their campaign or the scene of something much worse than spoiled desserts. The game had changed, the stakes had escalated, and we were now racing against time to prevent what could be a disaster disguised as a charitable event. But as I watched Wolfe settle into his methodical approach to unraveling the truth, I felt the familiar confidence that comes from working with someone whose appetite for justice was every bit as refined as his taste in cuisine. The hunt for our saboteur was about to begin in earnest, and I had the distinct feeling that Amity Cole's carefully orchestrated campaign was about to encounter the immovable force of Nero Wolfe's determination to restore order to his world. Saul materialized at my elbow with the silent efficiency that had made him invaluable to Wolfe's operations for more years than either of us cared to count. His weathered face carried the expression of a man who had located exactly what he'd been hunting, though whether it would prove to be prey or predator remained to be determined. "Loading dock," he murmured, tilting his head toward the service corridor. "She's working on something that requires concentration and privacy. Thought you'd want first look before Kramer's boys start asking loud questions." I followed him through the maze of service passages that connected the hotel's public elegance to its working reality. The concrete floors held the accumulated scuffs of countless deliveries, and the air carried that particular mixture of industrial cleaning products and kitchen aromas that marked the boundary between performance and preparation. Amity Cole stood with her back to us beside a loading dock that had seen better decades, her compact frame bent over an opened leather case that contained enough specialized tools to stock a small pastry kitchen. She wore chef's whites that had been pressed with military precision, and her hands moved with the steady confidence of someone who had spent years measuring ingredients to the nearest gram. "Miss Cole," I said, keeping my voice conversational in my position between her and the nearest exit. "We've been looking for you." She turned without haste, removing latex gloves with the methodical care of someone accustomed to handling substances that demanded respect. Her face was angular and intelligent, with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of working under pressure, where mistakes meant ruined dishes and disappointed customers. "Mr. Goodwin," she replied, studying me with eyes that missed very little. "I was wondering when you'd get around to finding me. Your reputation suggested it wouldn't take long. That depends on whether you've been hiding or just working. What's in the case?" She gestured toward the leather roll with the pride of a craftsman displaying quality tools. "Everything I need to analyze contaminated ingredients and trace their sources. Someone's been systematically sabotaging Miss Vale's operation, and I've been trying to determine who and how. I examined the contents more closely and found exactly what her explanation suggested. Sample vials, testing strips, measuring instruments, and a collection of notes written in the elegant handwriting we'd been seeing on threatening messages for 3 days. But alongside the analytical equipment were items that raised different questions. A brass shim polished to mirror brightness, a small atomizer bottle, and traces of the same edible glitter that had decorated our office window sill. Interesting hobby, I observed, lifting the shim with 2 fingers. Pastry work or lockwork? Both, when necessary. Chocolate doesn't always release from molds willingly, and sometimes storage areas aren't as accessible as they should be for legitimate investigation. Her tone carried the matter-of-fact directness of someone stating obvious facts to slow students. And the threatening notes. Warning messages. When I discovered the first contaminated ingredients 3 days ago, I tried to alert Miss Vale through normal channels. She dismissed my concerns as the complaints of a terminated employee seeking attention. The notes were my attempt to communicate the seriousness of the situation without revealing my involvement. Saul had positioned himself where he could observe both our conversation and the loading dock's other exits, his presence unobtrusive but unmistakably alert. His experience with human nature had taught him to watch for the small movements that preceded either cooperation or flight. "Walk me through the timeline," I said, consulting my notebook. "When did you first suspect sabotage?" 4 days ago, when I received a call from Marcus Beaumont asking if I could assist with his competition preparation. During our conversation, he mentioned unusual problems with ingredient deliveries: salt that tasted wrong, gelatin that wouldn't set, vanilla that carried an odd aftertaste. Individual incidents might be explained by supplier errors, but the pattern suggested deliberate interference. She consulted her own notes, written in the precise script that had been terrorizing Miss Vale's operation. I began investigating yesterday, starting with the hotel's storage areas. The contaminated vanilla was obvious. Ipecac has a distinctive medicinal smell that doesn't belong in any kitchen, but the salt substitution was more sophisticated, requiring someone with detailed knowledge of supplier routines and delivery schedules. "Someone like you. Someone like me," she agreed without defensiveness. "Or like Owen Driscoll, who manages all vendor relationships for the hotel's catering operations. Or like Elena Marchetti, who has worked with these suppliers for years. Or like Timothy Walsh, who coordinates deliveries and maintains access logs." The analysis was methodical and professional, but it didn't explain the break-in at the brownstone or the careful examination of our files. I described the morning's violation of our sanctuary, watching her expression for any reaction that might confirm or eliminate her involvement. "I needed to understand the scope of your investigation," she said simply. "If you were focusing on external threats while missing internal corruption, the sabotage would continue regardless of security measures. Your files confirmed my suspicions about the dietary restriction modifications. Someone with access to both medical information and kitchen operations has been creating conditions for systematic poisoning. So you decided to commit burglary to satisfy your curiosity. I decided to gather information necessary to prevent mass casualties tomorrow night. The window entry was regrettable, but necessary. Direct contact would have been dismissed as the desperate claims of a terminated employee with obvious motives for causing trouble. Kramer's heavy footsteps announced his arrival before his voice carried down the corridor, accompanied by the distinctive sound of police officers who had been searching empty rooms for too long. His expression suggested he had reached the limit of his patience for elaborate mysteries involving pastry chefs and charity galas. "Found her," I called, gesturing toward Amity Cole, who had resumed packing her analytical equipment with the calm efficiency of someone who had expected this moment. "Miss Cole," Kramer announced, producing handcuffs with the weary satisfaction of a man finally able to take concrete action. You're under arrest for breaking and entering, assault with a dangerous substance, and conspiracy to commit fraud." "Inspector," Wolfe's voice interrupted from the service corridor entrance, where he had appeared with Fritz's assistance and the determined expression of someone whose investigation had reached a crucial juncture. "Miss Cole's arrest would be premature and counterproductive. She's not our primary adversary." Kramer's jaw worked like he was chewing leather that had been improperly tenderized. "Wolfe, she broke into your office, contaminated food that hospitalized 3 people, and has been terrorizing a charity operation for 3 days. What more do you need?" "I need the person who orchestrated these incidents while using Miss Cole's termination as convenient cover," Wolfe replied, settling his considerable bulk against the loading dock's concrete wall. "Miss Cole's analytical work has confirmed my suspicions about the systematic nature of this sabotage. Someone with intimate knowledge of both charity operations and hotel procedures has been creating conditions for tomorrow night's disaster." He gestured toward the evidence Amity had assembled, examining her notes with the attention usually reserved for rare manuscripts. "The contamination pattern reveals sophisticated planning combined with detailed knowledge of supplier routines, medical restrictions, and emergency response procedures. This exceeds the capabilities of a terminated pastry assistant seeking revenge." "Then who?" I demanded, studying the accumulated evidence that painted an increasingly complex picture of professional sabotage disguised as amateur mischief. "Someone who understood that Miss Cole's involvement would provide perfect misdirection while they prepared their final assault on tomorrow's event," Wolfe replied with the quiet certainty of someone stating natural law. "We will gather all relevant parties at the brownstone this evening. Miss Cole will attend as a witness rather than a suspect." Kramer's expression suggested he was watching his straightforward arrest case transform into something requiring actual detective work. "And if she disappears between now and tonight?" "She won't," Wolfe said, studying Amity Cole with the attention usually reserved for questionable ingredients. "Her investigation parallels our own, and she requires our resources to complete her analysis. Mutual necessity creates more reliable cooperation than handcuffs." As we prepared to return to the brownstone, I reflected on how quickly our case had evolved from mysterious cakes to systematic sabotage involving multiple parties with overlapping motives and capabilities. Someone had been playing an elaborate game using Amity Cole's termination as cover for increasingly dangerous activities, and tomorrow night's gala had become the focal point of what might be their most devastating move yet. The afternoon sun slanted through the loading dock's industrial windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where evidence of professional sabotage lay scattered like ingredients awaiting assembly into something much more dangerous than dessert. Somewhere in the maze of charity politics and professional kitchens, our real adversary was preparing for the final act of their carefully orchestrated campaign. Tonight, Wolfe would gather all the players in his office, where the controlled environment of the brownstone would allow him to apply the methodical pressure that usually revealed truth from the comfortable distance of his desk chair. The hunt for our saboteur was about to enter its most crucial phase, and I had the distinct feeling that before the evening ended, we would finally understand the full scope of what we were confronting. The game had changed, the stakes had escalated, and tomorrow night's Sweet and Right Gala was shaping up to be either the scene of triumph or disaster, depending on whether Wolfe's appetite for justice could outmaneuver someone whose willingness to cause harm had already been demonstrated with uncomfortable clarity. The cab ride back to the brownstone gave me time to process the afternoon's developments, though processing and understanding remained two different animals entirely. Amity Cole sat beside Miss Vale with the composed efficiency of someone whose day had included burglary, chemical analysis, and narrowly avoiding arrest, all in service of preventing mass poisoning at a charity gala. Her leather case rested on her lap like a doctor's bag, which in a sense it had become. "Miss Cole," I said as we pulled up to the familiar limestone facade, "you've been conducting your own investigation for 3 days. What haven't you told us?" She studied me with eyes that had learned to measure ingredients to the nearest gram and people to the nearest motive. Marcus Beaumont contacted me Tuesday night, not about competition assistance as I mentioned, but because he suspected someone was systematically sabotaging multiple kitchens. His gelatin failures, the salt contamination at 2 other venues, vanilla that carried medicinal undertones. It formed a pattern that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. And you didn't think to mention this earlier because Marcus is desperate enough to win tomorrow's competition that he might fabricate evidence to eliminate rivals. I needed independent confirmation before involving him in accusations that could destroy careers. She paused as Fritz appeared to assist with the front door, also because someone has been watching him, and by extension, watching me. That last detail had the ring of truth wrapped in concern. If our saboteur was sophisticated enough to monitor multiple targets while executing systematic contamination, they were operating with resources that exceeded amateur revenge. Wolfe had already settled behind his desk when we entered the office, which meant Fritz had executed a transition that would have impressed a symphony conductor. 3 legal pads sat precisely aligned on my desk. The house phone had been cleared for extended use, and the familiar ritual of evening beer preparation was proceeding with clockwork efficiency. "Archie," Wolfe said without preamble, "you will contact the following individuals and request their presence here at 8 o'clock this evening. Miss Vale, naturally. Miss Marchetti from the hotel kitchen. Mr. Driscoll, the banquet coordinator. Mr. Walsh, the nervous event planner. And Mr. Marcus Beaumont, whose desperation may prove illuminating." I started dialing while Wolfe outlined his strategy with the methodical precision he usually reserved for orchid cultivation schedules. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create multiple opportunities for our saboteur to reveal themselves through carefully orchestrated pressure and strategic misinformation. "First," he instructed while I worked the phone, "you will call the food critic Parker and inform him that tomorrow's featured dessert will be an almond financier with apricot glaze. Emphasize that the menu is locked and the announcement is intended to generate press coverage." Miss Vale's eyebrows rose a fraction. "That's not the actual menu." "Indeed. It's bait designed to flush movement from someone monitoring our investigation." Wolfe's expression carried the satisfaction of a chess player positioning pieces for an inevitable checkmate. "Second, you will contact Miss Vale's office and speak only with Mrs. Galway. Instruct her to place the dietary restriction binder in her bottom drawer and depart for dinner at 7, leaving the office accessible. Mr. Panzer will observe who attempts to retrieve it." The beauty of the strategy was its multiple layers. If our saboteur took the bait about almonds, they would need to access the dietary restrictions to identify potential victims. If they ignored the bait, their restraint would be equally revealing. By 6:30, I had confirmations from all parties and had planted the almond story with Parker, who received it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just been handed exclusive access to culinary gossip. Saul had positioned himself for surveillance of Miss Vale's office, and Fritz had secured the kitchen with the thoroughness of someone protecting national secrets. At precisely 7:15, Saul's voice crackled through the house phone with the efficiency of a military communications operator. Movement at the target location. Timothy Walsh entered through the main office entrance, proceeded directly to Mrs. Galway's desk, and retrieved the binder from the bottom drawer. Total time inside: 4 minutes, 37 seconds. "Excellent," Wolfe murmured, making a note on his legal pad. "Continue observation." Walsh exited and met Owen Driscoll at the service elevator. Brief exchange. Driscoll pocketed something small, possibly photographed documents. They separated immediately after. The pieces were falling into position with the precision of a well-rehearsed kitchen brigade. Someone was coordinating access to both the dietary information and the hotel's operational systems, using Walsh's nervous compliance and Driscoll's administrative authority to execute their systematic sabotage. At 7:45, Our doorbell announced the arrival of what Fritz would have called an evening's worth of complications. Miss Vale entered first, her composure intact despite 3 days of escalating crisis management. Elena Marchetti followed with the rigid posture of someone whose professional reputation had been systematically undermined. Owen Driscoll carried himself with military bearing that suggested he approached even social gatherings as tactical operations requiring careful assessment. Timothy Walsh appeared to be vibrating at a frequency visible to the naked eye, his nervous energy making him seem guilty of something, even if that something remained undefined. Marcus Beaumont arrived last, wearing a jacket that had seen too much hope and carrying himself with the brittle confidence of someone whose financial future depended on tomorrow's competition results. Amity Cole took a position near the bookshelves, her analytical case beside her chair, like evidence awaiting presentation. Inspector Kramer filled the doorway with his customary expression of skeptical patience, while Pearlie stationed himself, where he could observe both exits and expressions. Wolfe surveyed the assembled group with the attention he usually reserved for questionable mushrooms, allowing silence to establish the proper atmosphere for revelation. The office felt charged with the particular tension that comes when multiple people harbor secrets they hope won't be exposed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone calling a formal proceeding to order, "we gather to address a systematic campaign of sabotage that has escalated from pranks to assault. 3 people have been hospitalized, property has been violated, and tomorrow's charitable event remains under direct threat from someone whose methods demonstrate both culinary expertise and criminal coordination." He gestured toward the evidence Fritz had arranged on the side table, sample vials, contaminated ingredients, and the threatening notes that had started our investigation. The pattern reveals sophisticated planning combined with detailed knowledge of multiple operational systems. Someone has been orchestrating incidents while maintaining careful distance from direct involvement. Timothy Walsh's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his chair arms, while Owen Driscoll's military posture remained unchanged despite the obvious implications of Wolfe's opening statement. The evening was about to become significantly more complicated, and I had the distinct feeling that someone's carefully constructed facade was about to collapse under the methodical pressure that Wolfe applied with the precision of a master chef reducing a complex sauce. The hunt for our saboteur had reached its crucial phase, and the familiar rhythms of the brownstone were about to be disrupted by revelations that would finally explain why someone had declared war on dessert itself, using charity as their battlefield and innocent people as their casualties. The gathering was complete, the evidence was assembled, and Wolfe was preparing to apply the intellectual pressure that would transform our collection of suspects into a clear identification of guilt. The game had moved to his territory now, where controlled environment and methodical analysis would reveal truths that someone had gone to considerable length to conceal. Wolfe allowed the silence to work its particular magic on the assembled group, watching as nervous energy transformed into visible discomfort under the weight of unspoken accusations. The office felt charged with the tension that comes when multiple people harbor secrets they desperately hope won't be exposed, and I could practically see the mental calculations as each suspect processed their position in what was rapidly becoming a formal interrogation. "Mr. Walsh," Wolfe said with the surgical precision of someone calling court to order, "you retrieved the dietary restriction binder from Mrs. Galway's desk at 7:16 this evening. You were observed. You then met Mr. Driscoll and surrendered something to him. Explain your actions." Timothy's face cycled through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that would have alarmed a medical professional. His hands worked at his jacket cuffs with the desperate energy of someone trying to knit his way out of trouble, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the conviction of wet cardboard. "I was checking final seating arrangements," he stammered, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. Miss Vale requested updated numbers for tomorrow's briefing, and I needed to verify dietary restrictions for last-minute changes. An interesting explanation, Wolfe observed, with the gentle reproach of someone pointing out obvious flaws to slow students. Considering Miss Vale is present and made no such request. Also considering you photographed specific pages rather than counting entries, and that you used a micro camera card to capture the images. The precision of Wolfe's knowledge hit Timothy like a physical blow. His nervous energy transformed into something approaching panic, and he cast a desperate glance toward Owen Driscoll, seeking support that wasn't forthcoming. "Mr. Driscoll," Wolfe continued without pause, "you met Mr. Walsh immediately after his retrieval mission and received the photographed materials. Your explanation?" Owen Driscoll's military bearing remained intact, but hairline cracks were beginning to appear in his composure. Routine coordination of service protocols, with 3 staff members hospitalized and police investigating, I needed to ensure we had complete documentation of all dietary requirements for tomorrow's event. Yet Miss Marchetti was not consulted about these urgent protocols, despite being head of kitchen operations, Wolfe noted. Curious oversight for someone as methodical as yourself. Elena straightened in her chair with the rigid posture of someone whose professional competence had been questioned. "I received no updated dietary information today. All preparations were completed yesterday according to original specifications, and no changes were authorized through proper channels." The contradiction hung in the air like smoke from a ruined souffle, and I watched Walsh and Driscoll exchange the kind of glance that passes between conspirators who've just realized their carefully rehearsed story has developed fatal flaws. "Miss Cole," Wolfe said, shifting his attention with practiced efficiency. "Your analysis of the contaminated ingredients revealed what specific pattern?" Amity consulted her notes with professional precision. "Systematic contamination designed to create maximum disruption while maintaining legal deniability. The ipecac dosage was carefully calculated to cause violent illness without permanent harm. The salt substitution was precisely measured to ruin preparations without creating obvious evidence of tampering. Someone with both pharmaceutical knowledge and professional kitchen experience executed these incidents. And the timing corresponded to what external factor? Competition preparation schedules. Each incident occurred exactly when it would cause maximum disruption to specific competitors, while leaving time for recovery before the actual event. She paused, studying her documentation. The pattern suggests someone with detailed knowledge of both kitchen operations and event logistics. Marcus Beaumont had been listening with the intense concentration of someone whose financial future depended on the evening's revelations. When Wolfe's attention turned to him, he straightened with the brittle hope of someone who might finally understand what had been happening to his business. "Mr. Beaumont, you contacted Miss Cole about suspicious incidents at your establishment. When did you first suspect coordinated sabotage rather than random supplier problems?" "Tuesday morning," Marcus replied, his voice hollow with exhaustion and worry. The gelatin failure was too precise, too perfectly timed to ruin a full day's preparation. Then I heard similar stories from 2 other competitors. Salt problems, vanilla that smelled medicinal, equipment malfunctions at exactly the wrong moments. "And you shared this information with whom?" The question landed like a perfectly aimed accusation, and Marcus's expression revealed the answer before his voice could form the words. "Timothy Walsh. He was coordinating between competitors and hotel staff, so I thought he should know about potential supplier problems that might affect multiple kitchens. The pieces were falling into position with elegant precision. Timothy Walsh possessed access to dietary restrictions, competition schedules, and detailed information about each participant's vulnerabilities. Owen Driscoll controlled vendor relationships, storage access, and emergency procedures. Together, they could execute systematic sabotage while maintaining the appearance of helpful cooperation." "The motive becomes clear," Wolfe said with the satisfaction of someone who'd identified the missing ingredient in a complex recipe. when we examine the financial pressures driving both gentlemen. Mr. Walsh, your employment contract includes performance clauses that would result in termination if tomorrow's event were cancelled. Mr. Driscoll, your catering management fees include substantial bonuses tied to successful completion, plus overtime compensation for crisis management. Driscoll's military bearing was developing visible stress fractures. Standard business practice, hotels charge premium rates for emergency services. Indeed, however, your personal financial situation has become precarious due to gambling debts requiring immediate attention. Together, you faced a situation where controlled crisis could generate additional revenue through enhanced security fees, overtime compensation, and emergency consultation charges. The logic was elegant and damning. Create enough disruption to justify expanded services, while ensuring the problems never escalated beyond manageable limits. Use Amity Cole's termination as convenient misdirection while generating crisis management income from the chaos they themselves had orchestrated. The plan was sophisticated, Wolfe continued, his voice carrying grudging professional admiration. Create controlled crises that would warrant additional security protocols and specialized consultation fees. Generate enough concern to justify emergency measures and premium billing rates. Ensure the problems remained manageable while appearing genuinely threatening to justify enhanced compensation. Timothy Walsh's nervous energy had transformed into visible panic, while Owen Driscoll's composure was cracking under the methodical pressure of Wolfe's analysis. The beautiful simplicity of their scheme was being dissected with surgical precision. However, Wolfe said, his tone shifting to carry the weight of final judgment, your plan contained a fatal flaw that revealed both your guilt and your criminal intent. The contaminated vanilla that hospitalized 3 staff members exceeded your intended parameters, indicating either loss of control or deliberate escalation toward genuine harm. Saul's voice crackled through the house phone with military efficiency. Inspector, Subject Driscoll is carrying a micro-storage card, a brass lock shim, and a small flask containing pharmaceutical residue. Found them during the pat-down. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a pastry knife. Both men realized simultaneously that their carefully constructed facade had collapsed under the methodical pressure of Wolfe's investigation. The evening had reached its crucial moment. Their appetite for easy money was about to collide with Wolfe's appetite for justice. The dietary restriction alterations, Wolfe continued relentlessly, were designed not merely to create manageable illness, but to establish conditions for mass casualties that could be attributed to human error rather than criminal intent. Tomorrow's gala was to be your masterpiece. Systematic poisoning disguised as tragic accident, with liability falling on Miss Vale's organization rather than your conspiracy. Miss Vale's face had gone pale as the full implications became clear. You were planning to kill people for money. We were managing risk, Driscoll said through gritted teeth, his military discipline finally cracking completely. The insurance payouts alone would have funded your gambling debts while destroying innocent lives. Wolfe finished with quiet finality. Inspector Kramer, I believe you have sufficient evidence to proceed with arrests. As handcuffs clicked into place and rights were read, I reflected on how quickly greed could transform helpful coordinations into systematic attempted murder. Someone had tried to turn charity into carnage, using professional expertise to mask criminal intent. They had made the fatal error of believing they could outsmart the methodical intelligence that Nero Wolfe applied to all violations of the natural order. The brownstone was about to return to its peaceful routine, but not before we ensured that tomorrow's sweet and right gala could proceed without the shadow of deliberate malice hanging over its charitable mission. Justice, as always, would be served with the same precision that Fritz applied to his finest culinary creations. The handcuffs clicking into place had the finality of a perfectly timed soufflé, inevitable once the proper conditions were established and satisfying in direct proportion to the preparation required. Timothy Walsh's nervous energy transformed into something approaching panic as the reality of his situation settled over him like a collapsed pastry shell, while Owen Driscoll maintained his military bearing even as the evidence accumulated around him with methodical precision. "It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone seriously," Walsh stammered, his voice pitched high enough to shatter the crystal Fritz kept for special occasions. "Owen said we could create controlled problems, generate crisis management fees, maybe delay the event for rescheduling bonuses. The IPCAC was supposed to be mild, just enough to justify enhanced security protocols and premium billing rates." Inspector Kramer's expression suggested he was watching his straightforward sabotage case transform into something requiring actual detective work, complete with conspiracy charges and financial motive analysis that would keep prosecutors busy for months. "Keep talking, Walsh. Cooperation might help when sentencing comes around." Wolfe listened with the attention he usually reserved for Fritz's menu planning, occasionally making notes on his legal pad with the precision of someone documenting evidence for future reference. The confession was proceeding exactly as he'd anticipated. Desperate men with financial pressures rarely maintained solidarity when faced with criminal charges. "The gambling debts were Owen's problem, not mine," Timothy continued, his self-preservation instincts overwhelming whatever loyalty he might have felt toward his co-conspirator. "I just needed job security. My contract had performance clauses. If the gala was cancelled, I'd be terminated. But if we could create manageable problems that required extended consultation, both our positions would be secure with enhanced compensation." "The dietary restriction modifications," Wolfe said with surgical precision, "were whose innovation?" Driscoll's jaw worked like he was chewing leather that had been improperly tenderized, but Walsh answered without hesitation. "Owen's idea. He said if we could create a few mild allergic reactions, nothing serious, just enough to justify enhanced medical protocols and liability insurance adjustments, the fees would cover both our financial problems." "Except," Amity Cole interjected with the rigid posture of someone whose professional competence had been insulted, "IPCAC doesn't accidentally concentrate itself. Someone deliberately increased the dosage when they realized the original plan wasn't generating sufficient crisis to justify the fees they needed." The technical precision of her analysis cut through Walsh's attempts at misdirection like a proper knife through overproofed dough. Wolfe nodded approvingly. Professional sabotage required professional knowledge, and someone had been applying pharmaceutical expertise with criminal intent. "Inspector," Wolfe said, producing a thin sheet of paper from his desk drawer, "you will find that the brass shim in Mr. Driscoll's possession matches the width of scratches on both Miss Marchetti's office door and my window latch. The edible glitter residue on my windowsill is particular to a brand in the hotel's inventory. Silver, labeled Starlight 3. It transferred to Mr. Driscoll's cuff when he inspected display trays yesterday morning, then to my sill during his reconnaissance mission." Kramer grunted acknowledgement. Not admiration and not dissent, but the professional recognition that comes when evidence aligns with theory in ways that satisfy courtroom requirements. After the police had departed with their prisoners and the necessary paperwork, the office began its slow reversion to normal. Miss Vale's relief was visible but controlled, the satisfaction of someone who'd prevented disaster through methodical investigation rather than luck. "The gala will proceed as scheduled," she announced with steel in her voice that could have cut through the hotel's marble facade. 12 pediatric research grants depend on tomorrow's success, and we won't let criminal conspiracy interfere with children's medical care." "You will proceed," Wolfe agreed, "but with modifications. Archie will coordinate security protocols with Miss Cole and Miss Marchetti. Every critical ingredient gets replaced from sealed stock tonight. Storage areas remain locked with limited key access. Dietary restrictions are re-verified from original medical forms, not copies. Mr. Panzer will maintain perimeter surveillance." The beauty of the plan was its elegant simplicity. Eliminate variables through redundancy, verify everything through multiple channels, and maintain constant observation of anyone with access to preparation areas. Someone had tried to turn charity into carnage through systematic corruption of the food itself, but methodical security would prevent any remaining threats. Saturday morning arrived with Fritz humming Puccini in the kitchen, a sure sign that the natural order of things had been restored within our four walls, even as we maintained vigilance elsewhere. The Astoria Carlton's competition kitchen had been transformed into what Fritz would have called a fortress with whisks, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Elena Marchetti ran her stations like a field marshal who'd learned that victory required both skill and paranoia. Amity Cole moved through storage areas with the quiet authority of someone whose analytical expertise had been vindicated by events. Saul's presence was felt rather than seen, his surveillance covering every entrance and exit with the thoroughness that made him invaluable to Wolfe's operations. The new vanilla came from glass ampules that Elena cracked like a violinist tuning strings. Salt and sugar occupied clear bins with tamper seals that would reveal any interference. Gelatin packets were counted, signed, and logged with the precision usually reserved for controlled substances. We implemented color-coded verification systems and checker redundancy, then repeated the entire process, because defeating saboteurs required embracing boredom and repetition as tactical advantages. Marcus Beaumont worked in his preparation corner with steady hands and focused concentration, his financial desperation replaced by the professional satisfaction of competing on level ground. The other competitors had adapted to enhanced security protocols with the pragmatic acceptance of people whose careers depended on trusting systematic procedures over personal convenience. 3 times during the afternoon, I intercepted individuals where they shouldn't be. Twice wait staff seeking coffee, once a vendor representative with sample syrups who thought generosity opened doors. Saul escorted the vendor to the street with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, and I made a mental note to send his company a fruit basket with a polite letter about appropriate timing. By 8:15 that evening, the gala had reached that perfect pitch where money opens its wallet for worthy causes. Plated desserts moved from kitchen to dining room under our verification system, in a ballet that would have made Fritz proud. No collapses, no ambulances, no headlines requiring damage control. The competition results were almost anticlimactic after the week's drama. Marcus earned silver rather than gold, accepting the recognition with the dignity of someone who understood that sometimes survival was the prize and ribbons were merely decorative wrapping. The winner was competent and professional. The donors responded with appropriate enthusiasm. That's charity for you. Steady hands beat fireworks when the stakes involved children's medical research. I called Wolfe from a service alcove that smelled of lemon oil and satisfied relief. Mission accomplished. No surprises, no incidents, no poison. If I have to taste one more apricot variation, I may request hazard pay. Don't, he replied with characteristic brevity. You'd starve on what I'd offer. I returned to the brownstone at midnight to find the lights dimmed but the dining room still holding warmth. Fritz had prepared a simple dessert, poached pears with vanilla and sauternes, delicate as good manners and twice as satisfying after a week of systematic sabotage. Wolfe sat at his customary place, napkin folded with the precision of a diplomatic treaty. Report, he said without preamble. Complete success. No casualties, no crises, no complications. Driscoll and Walsh are providing detailed confessions to reduce their sentences. Kramer's taking credit he doesn't want to take. Amity Cole earned permanent rehabilitation in Miss Vale's estimation. The charity raised enough to fund pediatric research for the next fiscal year, plus a donation receipt that arrived with your name on it. Wolfe nodded once, the gesture carrying satisfaction proportionate to the effort required. He sampled the poached pears with the reverence usually reserved for theological contemplation. then fixed me with the look that meant philosophical observation was forthcoming. "Dessert," he said in the tone he reserved for filing cases under human folly, "represents the culmination of a meal. Not sustenance, but affirmation. Not necessity, but grace. To corrupt it for criminal profit is to desecrate the very concept of hospitality. Men who transform pleasure into coercion mistake appetite for leverage, sweetness for weakness. They are gluttons not for food, but for dominion over others' trust." He paused, considering the pear on his spoon with the attention usually reserved for rare orchids. "The corruption of food violates the most fundamental social contract, that what nourishes should not harm, that what brings pleasure should not carry malice. To betray that trust for financial gain reveals a poverty of spirit that no amount of money could remedy." "On the bright side," I observed, "they'll be dining on institutional cuisine for the foreseeable future." His expression suggested I'd proposed ketchup on a perfectly prepared côte de bœuf. "Spare me culinary metaphors in penal contexts, Archie. Some subjects are too sacred for humor." Fritz appeared with coffee, the familiar ritual marking our return to normal routines. Outside, the city performed its nightly imitation of rest, while inside, the brownstone reclaimed its peaceful rhythms. We'd weathered trespass, escalation, breaking and entering, and systematic poisoning disguised as crisis management. The kitchen was secure, the office was ours again, and the small golden bull paperweight sat exactly where it belonged. "Tomorrow," Wolfe announced with the finality of natural law, "no visitors. I'll inform the universe accordingly." He grunted approval, the sound, carrying satisfaction earned through methodical application of intelligence to the restoration of proper order. I finished my coffee and let the day file itself under cases completed, reflecting on how quickly professional expertise could be corrupted when financial pressure met criminal opportunity. If anyone else has a mind to declare war on dessert, they'd better prepare for a siege. In this house, sweetness answers to justice, and justice, when it occupies that leather chair, does not negotiate with those who would poison pleasure for profit. The natural order had been restored. Fritz could return to his culinary artistry without fear of malicious interference, and Nero Wolfe's appetite for truth had once again proven every bit as refined as his taste in properly prepared cuisine. The brownstone settled into its nighttime quiet, carrying the satisfaction that comes when intelligence triumphs over greed, when systematic investigation defeats criminal conspiracy, and when the sanctity of food itself is protected from those who would corrupt it for personal gain. Justice, as always, had been served with the precision that marked all of Wolfe's investigations, methodical, thorough, and absolutely final. Sunday morning arrived, with Fritz humming Puccini in the kitchen, a sure sign that the natural order of things had been fully restored within our four walls. The familiar sounds of breakfast preparation carried none of the underlying tension that had marked the previous week, and the brownstone had reclaimed its peaceful rhythms with the satisfaction of a well-tuned orchestra returning to a beloved symphony. I found Wolfe at his customary breakfast post, working through his morning routine with the precision of a Swiss chronometer. The morning paper lay folded beside his plate, its headlines proclaiming the successful conclusion of what the society pages had dubbed the sweet charity scandal, though their version bore only passing resemblance to the systematic conspiracy we'd actually unraveled. At 9:30, our doorbell announced an unexpected but not unwelcome visitor. Amity Cole stood on our stoop carrying a small package wrapped in plain brown paper, her expression mixing determination with something approaching contrition. Fritz showed her to the office, where she took the red leather chair with the careful movements of someone preparing to settle accounts. "Mr. Wolfe," she began without preamble, "I've come to return something that belongs to you." She placed the package on his desk and unwrapped it to reveal a single Tahitian vanilla bean, pristine in its glass vial. "I took this during my unauthorized visit to your kitchen. It was wrong of me, regardless of my motives. Wolfe examined the returned bean with the attention he usually reserved for rare orchids, then handed it to Fritz, who received it like a prodigal ingredient returning home after an unfortunate adventure. "Your confession is noted and accepted," Wolfe said with the measured tone he reserved for matters involving both justice and mercy. "The violation of my kitchen was a trespass, but it was committed in service of preventing greater harm. The distinction matters. I also wanted to inform you that Inspector Kramer has requested a complete written account of my investigation, including methods and timeline. I'll be providing that this afternoon, along with all my analytical findings." She paused, studying Wolfe's expression. "The district attorney believes my cooperation will be valuable in securing convictions. And Mr. Walsh and Mr. Driscoll. Walsh is providing detailed testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Driscoll remains silent, but the physical evidence, the brass shim, the micro camera, the pharmaceutical residue, speaks eloquently on its own." Her professional satisfaction was evident. "The gambling debts have been thoroughly documented. Both men will face substantial prison sentences." The telephone interrupted our conversation, bringing Miss Vale's voice with news that the previous evening's gala had exceeded all expectations. The enhanced security protocols had worked flawlessly. The competition had proceeded without incident, and the charity had raised enough funds to support pediatric research for the next 2 years. "More importantly," she added, 3 other charitable organizations have requested consultation on implementing similar security measures for their events. It seems our unfortunate experience has created a market for professional vigilance in the catering industry." After she hung up, Wolfe leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone whose investment in justice had yielded appropriate returns. But something in his demeanor suggested he was processing implications that extended beyond simple case resolution. "The pattern revealed by this investigation troubles me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of broader concerns. "Professional expertise corrupted by financial pressure, systematic sabotage disguised as helpful coordination, trust violated for monetary gain. These elements suggest vulnerabilities that extend far beyond charity galas and hotel kitchens." I understood his concern. How many other systems depended on the integrity of individuals with specialized knowledge and legitimate access? How many professionals faced financial pressures that might tempt them to monetize their expertise through criminal application? "The solution," Wolfe continued, "requires recognizing that expertise without ethics becomes a weapon. Systems that depend on individual integrity must include mechanisms for detecting its absence." Miss Cole's analytical approach provided the key: independent verification of suspicious patterns, regardless of their apparent legitimacy. At 11 o'clock, Marcus Beaumont appeared at our door, his manner transformed from the desperate anxiety that had marked our earlier encounters. The successful gala had generated enough business, inquiries to secure his financial future, and his relief was evident in every gesture. "I wanted to thank you for preventing what could have been a catastrophe for everyone involved in competitive pastry," he said, settling into the red leather chair. "But I also wanted to discuss something that's been troubling me since yesterday's revelations." Wolfe inclined his head precisely 1/4 inch, indicating willingness to listen. "The pattern you uncovered, professionals using their expertise for criminal purposes while maintaining the appearance of legitimate cooperation. It's not unique to food service," Marcus continued. "Medical professionals with access to pharmaceuticals, financial advisors with client information, contractors with building access codes. You've identified something larger than a simple conspiracy." "Indeed," Wolfe agreed. "Any system that combines professional competence with institutional trust contains similar potential for systematic abuse. The price of maintaining that trust is constant verification that those who possess specialized knowledge continue to deserve it." As our visitors departed and the afternoon settled into its familiar rhythms, I reflected on how our investigation had evolved from mysterious cakes to systematic conspiracy to philosophical examination of professional ethics. Someone had tried to corrupt the simple pleasure of dessert for financial gain, but their failure had revealed principles that would serve us well in future encounters with those who mistake expertise for license. Fritz appeared with afternoon refreshments, his contentment evident in every precise movement as he arranged plates without fear that his ingredients had been compromised by criminal enterprise. The kitchen was secure, the office was ours, and the small golden bull paperweight sat exactly where it belonged. "The corruption of food," Wolfe observed, sampling Fritz's perfectly prepared cucumber sandwiches, "violates the most fundamental social contract that what nourishes should not harm, that what brings pleasure should not carry malice. To betray that trust for financial gain reveals a poverty of spirit that no amount of money could remedy." He paused, considering the delicate balance of flavors with the attention usually reserved for rare manuscripts. Hospitality represents civilization's triumph over savagery, the transformation of mere sustenance into grace, of necessity into art. Those who would corrupt it for profit demonstrate their unfitness for civilized society. "On the bright side," I observed, "they'll be dining on institutional cuisine for the foreseeable future." His expression suggested I'd proposed ketchup on a perfectly prepared Côte de Boeuf, but there was satisfaction beneath the reproach. As evening approached, the brownstone settled into its peaceful routine. Outside, the city performed its nightly imitation of rest, while inside, we had reclaimed the sanctuary that someone had dared to violate. We'd weathered systematic sabotage, breaking and entering, and deliberate poisoning disguised as crisis management. The natural order had been restored through methodical application of intelligence to the detection and defeat of criminal conspiracy. Fritz hummed while preparing dinner, his operatic contentment marking our return to normal rhythms. The case files were complete, the invoices would be paid, and tomorrow would bring new challenges requiring the same careful attention to detail that had served us so well in protecting the sanctity of charitable dessert from those who would poison it for profit. The brownstone held the satisfaction that comes when justice is served, with the same precision that Fritz applied to his finest culinary creations. Someone had declared war on sweetness itself, and they had discovered that in this house, where appetite for truth matches appetite for properly prepared cuisine, such wars are won through patience, intelligence, and absolute refusal to compromise with those who would corrupt trust for personal gain. The golden bull paperweight caught the lamplight, sitting exactly where it belonged in a world where order had been restored and justice had been served with the methodical precision that marked all of Nero Wolfe's investigations. The case was closed, the kitchen was secure, and Fritz's humming carried the contentment of someone whose sacred domain had been protected from those who would profane it. In the end, that was enough. It was always enough. Monday evening brought the kind of autumn stillness that made the brownstone feel like a fortress against the world's complications. The case files sat neatly stacked on my desk, awaiting final organization before joining the others in our filing system. Walsh and Driscoll had been formally charged, their conspiracy documented with a thoroughness that satisfies both prosecutors and insurance companies. At 8:15, our doorbell announced Inspector Kramer's arrival, carrying a manila envelope that suggested official business requiring Wolfe's attention. He settled into the red leather chair with the weary relief of someone whose case had concluded without political complications. "Final paperwork," he announced. "The district attorney wanted me to express his appreciation for your cooperation. Both defendants are pleading guilty to avoid trial. Walsh will serve 18 months. Driscoll gets 3 to 5 years. The gambling debts have been seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise." Wolfe accepted the documents with characteristic precision. "The charges are comprehensive? Conspiracy to commit assault, fraud, breaking and entering, attempted poisoning, and criminal endangerment. Your analysis of their financial motives was accurate. Without those details, we might have missed the systematic nature of their conspiracy. After Kramer departed, I found additional correspondence that completed our understanding of the case's resolution. Amity, Cole had accepted a position as food safety consultant with Miss Vale's organization, her analytical expertise now serving legitimate purposes. Marcus Beaumont's successful participation in the gala had generated enough business inquiries to secure his financial future. Tuesday brought news that the enhanced security protocols we'd developed were being adopted by catering operations throughout the city. Professional associations were implementing verification systems, and the hospitality industry was recognizing that systematic vigilance served everyone's interests better than trusting individual integrity without confirmation. The unintended consequence of criminal conspiracy, Wolfe observed, is often the strengthening of systems that were previously vulnerable to exploitation. Walsh and Driscoll's sabotage has created awareness that will prevent similar crimes for years to come. Wednesday evening found us in the dining room, where Fritz had prepared a meal that would have made angels weep with envy. Truffle-infused pheasant breast with delicate reduction, accompanied by glazed carrots and perfectly roasted potatoes. Each bite was a celebration of precision and natural flavor, a stark contrast to the week's gastronomic perversions. As Fritz presented a single, exquisite chocolate soufflé, light as a whisper and dark as midnight, Wolfe broke his contemplative silence. The case was not merely a demonstration of criminal ingenuity, but a stark illustration of human frailty, he began, his voice filling the quiet room. Walsh and Driscoll, consumed by financial desperation, chose to dismantle the very foundations of trust upon which their professions rested. They sought to profit from engineered chaos, mistaking the veneer of order for its substance. He paused, taking a delicate spoonful of the soufflé, allowing the flavor to unfold on his tongue. To corrupt food, Archie, is to betray a fundamental human covenant. Food, in its purest form, represents sustenance, pleasure, and fellowship. To weaponize it, to twist its purpose into an instrument of deceit and harm, speaks to a moral poverty that transcends mere greed. I nodded, understanding the deeper implications. They figured if they could create just enough trouble, they could milk the system for emergency fees and bonuses. A little ipecac here, some fudged allergy lists there, and suddenly they're indispensable crisis managers. Precisely. They understood the mechanics of their respective domains, but utterly failed to comprehend the ethical architecture that underpins such systems. Their crime was not merely against Miss Vale or the charity, but against the integrity of their own craft. Fritz, who had been listening with quiet intensity, nodded almost imperceptibly. The soufflé seemed to embody the contrast between their elaborate deceptions and the honest satisfaction of properly prepared food. The irony, Wolfe continued, is that their machinations, designed to secure their positions and enrich their pockets, ultimately led to their professional ruin and incarceration. Justice, like a perfectly balanced recipe, requires all ingredients to be in their proper proportion. Thursday morning brought the final piece of correspondence, a letter from the Pediatric Research Foundation that had benefited from the gala's success, along with a photograph of the laboratory equipment that charitable donations would purchase. 12 grants would fund research into childhood diseases, and our protection of dessert from criminal corruption had contributed to advancing medical science. As the brownstone settled into its familiar rhythms, I reflected on how our investigation had evolved from mysterious cakes to systematic conspiracy to philosophical examination of professional ethics. Someone had tried to corrupt the simple pleasure of dessert for financial gain, but their failure had revealed principles that extended far beyond charity galas and hotel kitchens. So the brownstone returns to its natural state, I said that evening, pushing back from dinner. No more mysterious cakes, no more midnight intruders, no more poisonings on the eve of charity galas. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin, a gesture of finality. Indeed, the orchids will flourish, Fritz's kitchen will remain inviolate, and my schedule will resume its accustomed precision. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. Order, like a well-made dessert, has been restored. Fritz's evening humming drifted from the kitchen where he prepared tomorrow's menu without fear that his ingredients had been compromised by malicious interference. The familiar sounds marked our complete return to normal routines, and the satisfaction in his operatic contentment suggested that the violation of his sacred domain had been properly avenged. The case files were complete, the criminals were serving appropriate sentences, and somewhere in the city, charitable desserts were being prepared by people who understood that their expertise carried the responsibility to nourish rather than harm. The golden bull paperweight caught the lamplight, sitting exactly where it belonged in a world where sweetness had been protected from those who would corrupt it. As I prepared for bed, I considered the week's lessons. We had protected the fundamental trust that makes civilization possible, the faith that what nourishes will not harm, that what brings pleasure will not carry malice. In our corner of the world, appetite for truth matched appetite for properly prepared cuisine, and justice had been served with the same precision that Fritz applied to his finest culinary creations. The brownstone settled into its nighttime quiet, carrying the deep satisfaction that comes when criminal conspiracy has been defeated through intelligence rather than force, and when the simple pleasure of dessert has been protected from those who would poison it for personal gain. The natural order had been restored, and that, as always, was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges requiring the same careful attention to detail that had served us so well in our battle against those who would corrupt sweetness itself for monetary gain. But tonight, Fritz could return to his culinary artistry without fear. Wolfe could pursue his orchids in peace, and I could file away another case where systematic investigation had triumphed over criminal conspiracy. The story was complete. Justice had been served, and in our world where trust answered to intelligence and sweetness answered to justice, there could be no compromise with those who would poison any of them for profit. The case of death by dessert was closed, filed away with the others where Nero Wolfe's methodical brilliance had once again proven that in matters of food, trust, and justice, the natural order would always prevail, always prevail, always prevail. Always prevail, 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 always prevail.